Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to yet another exciting episode of Coffee with Professionals. And today we have a very special guest, Ayush, with us. And Ayush will be sharing his insights as to how one can make a career in transfer pricing. Hi, Ayush.
Hi, Bimoit.
Hi.
So, I think I'll start by giving a brief introduction about me, and then we'll talk a bit more about transfer pricing. So, it's a very interesting
Absolutely.
topic. I hope everyone will like it. Right. So, just to give a brief background about me, my name is Ayush Poddar. I am a qualified chartered accountant, and I have around 10 years of experience in transfer pricing. So I have around 8 years of experience in transfer pricing in PwC India, and then I have recently shifted to KPMG Ireland. So I'm working as an associate director in KPMG Ireland. So really, people have a lot of question about what is transfer pricing, what is the scope in transfer pricing, what exactly do we do in transfer pricing. So I think I don't have really powerful facts right now. So there are really powerful figures which which can really tell you how influential transfer pricing as a profile is, shaping up. But I'll just give you a brief background what transfer pricing is. So transfer pricing is a very niche field. It's a part of a corporate tax. So every country will have a taxation system, right? So transfer pricing will be one of the sub parts of the corporate taxation that a country collects. But of late, a lot of focus is shifting to transfer pricing because it's one of the core elements from which government collects its revenue. So I think this everyone will be aware about the majority of the taxes that typically a government collects is from MNCs or big companies, right? The individual taxation, though it's an important part, but it doesn't shape up to be a major source of revenue. So around 70% to 80% of your taxation which a government collects it usually comes out from taxes that MNCs pays. Now, to ensure that the MNCs are paying correct taxes, transfer pricing comes into play. So there's a very powerful study that around 10 trillion of taxes were evaded by MNCs working together and shaping their tax affairs in a manner that they minimize their tax cost. So that's what transfer pricing is. Transfer pricing tries to avoid that. So the OECD has really starting 2015. OECD has started taking a lot of steps to minimize these tax evasions, and there's a lot of focus around transfer pricing. And individual countries have also realized that they need to gear up on transfer pricing to make sure that A, they collect correct sources of revenue, B, they don't go aggressive because transfer pricing is a double-edged sword. So you can't be very lenient because if you go lenient, you miss out on your taxes. But if you go very aggressive, you are demotivating the business environment. So it's a double-edged sword. You have to be precise. You can't be on the either side. You can't be aggressive. You can't be lenient. So yeah, it's a difficult stage. People are trying to figure out the right answer. But yeah, transfer pricing is complex. It's a growing field, and I would say if someone has interest, it's a good field. So that's a
Okay.
brief background about transfer pricing
Okay.
for me.
Thanks, Ayush. Thanks, Ayush. So, can you briefly touch upon what exactly do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So and what exactly we do in a day-to-day basis can be really categorized into, I would say, three buckets. So really, as explained, the way transfer pricing works is a job of a transfer pricing consultant is to make sure that the two up, up two entities which are part of the same group are dealing in the same manner which independent parties will deal. I can just give you a quick small example to talk about it. How does transfer pricing come into play? Let's suppose Maruti has two companies, one in US and one in India. Now the tax base in US, hypothetically, let's assume is 40%, right? And the tax base in India, again, let's hypothetically assume the tax rate in India is 20%, right? So Maruti as a group will want that all their majority of profits are parked in India so that they pay lesser tax, which is 20% in India. and lesser of their profits are parked into US so that they pay again, they don't have to pay 40%. So that's what a group will typically try to do. But let's suppose if Maruti US and Maruti India were third parties, they were not part of the same group. Definitely, given any day, Maruti US will never want to compromise on their share of profits, no matter what the tax cost is. Like an independent party will not care about tax cost and forgo their profits. So they will first focus on their profits, and whatever their tax affairs are, they will look at it after that. So transfer pricing tries to replicate that behavior between group entities so that proper share of taxes are collected by their relevant governments, right? So again, now coming back to the question, what does really a transfer pricing consultant will be doing on a day-to-day basis? So there are three buckets. One is documentation, which is more of a routine job. Second is planning or advisory, which is uh, which is a very good niche piece of work, which can be really complex. And third is dispute resolution. I won't talk about it. I can go on, but yeah, it's a super complex work. I can tell you, and it depends upon geography you are setting in. So some tax authorities can be very lenient, so it can be routine there. But some tax authorities like UK, they can be aggressive. So it can be a nightmare there. So in terms of documentation, what do you really do? So a important task in documentation is to understand what the businesses are doing. So what Maruti India is doing, what Maruti US is doing in our example, what are the kind of transactions they are entering into, and what is the basis by which they have taken a stand that their transaction demonstrate third party behavior. We call it arm's length in transfer pricing terminology. So what is the basis? There's 5 or 6 methods, technical methods, which have been prescribed. So which how have they chosen one of the methods and how are they applying it? So it's both about explaining the business, explaining the technicals of transfer pricing, and making sure that the transactions demonstrate the arm's length behavior. So that's the job of a documentation. So in short, documentation is compiling a documentation. It's like a tax return which demonstrate company's position regarding their transactions, their pricing, and how do they substantiate it. So that's a documentation job. I think that should be on a bucket number 2, because bucket number 1 will be planning. Before you demonstrate or substantiate how your transaction are arm's length, you need to have a basis as to how do you set your transaction at arm's length, right? So planning is a very important and very complex task. So planning is essentially is devising an approach for a group as to how should they set their intercompany policy. I still remember the good old days when I was fresher into transferring, and I was speaking to one of my mentors, and I had no I had no idea really what transfer pricing is. So I really asked him generally, what do you do in transfer pricing? So without naming the person, he happens to work in BMW. So he explained me that when BMW India was getting set up, right? When BMW was setting up its operation in India, so BMW generally imports their car from Germany as a CKD, right? So they had to decide at what price BMW Germany will sell to BMW India. So for them, it was a headache to decide, apart from what should be the customer pricing as to their market positioning in India, what should be their intra-group pricing. Because what happens is you will have a company getting incorporated in India now, right? But they will be audited 4 or 5 years down the line. They don't get audited at the spot, right? So you will have transactions getting accumulated over 4 or 5 years. And if your pricing is not correct, or if the government doesn't agree to your pricing, then you're talking about 5 years of PNL getting adjusted at once. So you can think about 5 years of revenue the company would have built up. The government on one fine day says, we don't agree to your pricing, we don't like it the way it is shaped up. We really propose adjustment to that. So planning is that bit. How do you make sure that you have covered everything? You cover business aspects, you cover the technical knowledge of transfer pricing. How do you articulate your position? How do you set up the prices? How do you justify it? It it's a core piece of transfer pricing work, which which sets out a roadmap for organization as to how their intercompany intra-group policy are going to shape up. So yeah, planning is really complex, and planning really involves understanding the business. So one very good part about transfer pricing, which I should let the viewer knows, transfer pricing is a part of tax, but it's really not tax. So in a corporate tax scenario, you will have tax laws, you will have a lot of sections, you will be reading about them, you will have a lot of case laws, while transfer pricing will have some of them, but transfer pricing is basically a business knowledge. So we initially we had conducted some survey as a part of PwC India in 2014 or 2015, and the results of the survey were quite interesting. The results indicated that in a typical MNC, it is 95% likelihood that a CEO will understand what a transfer pricing consultant is speaking rather than a CFO. Because CFO is again a accountant who is coming from tax laws, but CEO is the person who understands the business. So transfer pricing is just business. I have seen a lot of non-transfer pricing experts doing wonderfully in transfer pricing because they are business guys. They understand the business. So yeah, that's the first bucket. So we have covered first bucket planning. We have covered second bucket documentation. Third bucket disputes, which we have already spoken. It's a crazy field to be. No one wants to be there. So I can give you very. I'll summarize this. I will not take much time here. So I worked in India and I worked in Ireland. So Ireland typically covers both Ireland and UK because they are so closely integrated geographies, right? So Indian tax audit environment is slightly different as to what how to how as to what UK does, right? So Indian tax environment is more, I would say, is more routine. The tax of authorities will take time, but they won't dig into your business in and out. They don't have opportunity because the cycle is devised in such a manner. The officers keep rotating. They are time bound assessments, right? So while it can be a difficult spot to be, but I'll tell you, if you are in UK and you are getting audited by HMRC, it's a crazy place to be. They don't have any time limit to conclude your assessments. They can do crazy field visits. I've not seen a lot of field visits happening in India. So tax officers usually go to your sites, they evaluate your facts as to what you have stated in your documentation. All that is happening, all that is shaping up. But yeah, the dispute area is very difficult place. And it can go on like you can have unilateral tax disputes, Maruti India getting audited in India. You can have bilateral tax disputes. You can take it to next level. If Maruti India is not happy with the position that Indian government has taken, they can raise it internationally by filing a MAP, mutual agreement procedure, right? So the competent authorities in Maruti India and Maruti USA, in example, will get into discussion and will try to come to a common understanding to avoid double taxation. So yeah, there are multiple stages in dispute, which can be unilateral, bilateral, but yeah, it's a difficult task. It's a difficult spot to be. No one wants to be there. So yeah, these are three buckets what a transfer pricing consultant will be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Ayush. I think that was very comprehensive description of what exactly what exactly does a TP consultant typically do. Okay, so moving on, what are the typical skills that are required for the profile? Apart from the one you mentioned that having a business sense is very important, right? But apart from that, what are the typical skills that are required for making a career?
Yeah, again, that's an advantage about transfer pricing. So transfer price, I've seen a lot of diversified people from really diversified educational backgrounds working in transfer pricing. So when I talk about corporate taxes, in my limited experience, it has been mostly chartered accountants or certified public accountants who are practicing in corporate tax because it's such a tax oriented field. But when I speak about transfer pricing, I have seen obviously I've seen chartered accountants working, I've seen certified public accountants working, I've seen a lot of economists working. The transfer pricing originally is a more of an economist field rather than an accountant field. It's more about economics. How do you apply the business economics to come to a pricing? That's the economist role to come to a pricing. Yeah, so I've seen a lot of economists working. I've seen people from MBA background working in transfer pricing, quite a lot. I've seen graduates also working. So if you talk about big fours in India, they hire a lot of graduates at analyst level, and I've seen a lot of graduates like really shaping up their career to manager without any additional degree and even above. So I won't say it's a education qualification based field. It's more about how well you do it once you are in it. So I won't say education any specific education qualification is a bar to getting into transfer pricing. Yeah.
Okay, okay, got it. Thank you. And Ayush, moving on to the next question, who are the typical employers for this role? And like you are a live example of that. TP is a global profile. We've heard that over
Yeah.
and over again. And you yourself have worked in India as well as in Ireland. So one, I would request if you can touch upon who are the typical employers, right? And also some of the nuances of this being a global profile. So how does that work out?
Yeah, so that's an area where I say TP has its own advantages and its own disadvantages. So as you have already pointed out, TP is really a global profile. So you don't have to read any new tax laws, right? So there is one central book which we call OECD, a 600 pager book, right? It's not so huge, 600 pages. I think it's fine. You can, after reading all the books in chartered accountancy, 600 pager is fine, right? It's a 600 pager book which defines the global law. Now there are some countries which might have their country specific law, but that would be mostly within the guidance of that 600 pager book that OECD has written, right? So there are some other books as well, like UN has written its own model convention, right? So UN has its own guidance on transfer pricing, but essentially the principles that are prescribed in those 600 pages will govern how a transfer pricing profile operates, right? And it is acceptable in most of the jurisdictions, right? Because it's done after a lot of research. So really, transfer pricing is a global profile. Once you have worked in any jurisdiction, you are aware about the nuances of what transfer pricing is. And when you're applying jobs abroad, at least that education is not a bar or a relevant experience is not a bar. Like market can be a challenge sometimes. So when you're moving from, let's suppose, India to US, it can be a slight challenge because the geographies and the economies are at a different scale, right? But uh, it's not to say that a transfer pricing consultant who moves from India to US will not be able to do good because the laws are same, right? So you really don't need to learn about country specific laws. If you have knowledge about OECD, you're going to do good in transfer pricing. So that's the really best thing about transfer pricing, that the mobility is really strong. You will see a lot of transfer pricing professionals moving really quick from one jurisdiction to other jurisdiction. That doesn't happen in corporate taxes. So that's one.
Right.
Now with every good news there comes a challenge. That's life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the challenge is transfer pricing is such a niche profile, as I've said earlier, that you will not have a lot of employers like what a corporate tax field will offer you. So every MNE or every MNC will have a corporate tax person working with them, or maybe a team working with them, right? Because transfer pricing is such a niche field and it has ability to really disruptive to your business. MNEs generally rely on big fours for their transfer pricing position. So again, it depends upon the scale of the group you're talking. If you're talking about a really big group like Facebook's and Google, they will have their transfer pricing team, but again, the work will be outsourced to the big fours, right? But generally, I've said that a typical scope for a transfer pricing consultant is more likely to be in big four than in industries. There are opportunities, but they are limited. They're not as huge as what a corporate tax profile will offer you. So that's a disadvantage of transfer pricing. Basically, people who worked in a big four setup for 10 12 years and who really don't want that much stress. Sometimes big four can be stressful. I won't call it always, but sometimes they can be. Yeah. So who want to move to a better working lifestyle, then there can be struggles initially. I'm not saying that there won't be any jobs, but yeah, it can be slightly difficult to find because the number of jobs are limited. So that's the negative side about transfer pricing. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. And so, just piggybacking on that only, what are the growth prospects? So if let's say you're working in Big Four, then I understand that you can. It's a fast track route to becoming a partner. But apart from that, if you want to get out of the Big Four circle, so how is that possible?
Yeah, so just touching upon that, I think let's divide the question into two parts. What are the growth prospects in Big Four, and what are the growth prospects are outside Big Four? I think within Big Four, the growth prospects in every field will depend upon two aspects. One, individual performance, which I would say will influence 40%. The 60% will be influenced by how the field is shaping up, right? So if there's a lot of traction in the field itself, like there's a lot of there are a lot of companies getting set up, there's a lot of work coming in, and they have revenue. So I would say before is a it's a proper well-oiled machinery. So if you have a good revenues chipping in, you have good amount of work, and you're delivering, everything will go good. You will get time bound promotions, you will get good appraisals, you will get good bonuses, right? So transfer pricing is really shaped up, is really placed well right now. There is a lot of uncertainty. I won't call it good for the businesses, but it's always good for accountants, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty. Like even OECD does not have precise answer to most of the queries that are existing in the current environment around digital economies and a lot of other stuff. We can spend entire night discussing that, but the list won't end. So is really well placed in terms of how the profile is shaping up. Now, the second point will be how the individual is performing. So for me, it's not stagnant at all. They're very good time bound promotions. I think Big Fours, every market has different nuances. Big Fours generally have a 2-3 year cycle for each level. So you will grow from if you are a certified public accountant, you are a chartered accountant, you will start your career as an associate, and within 2 or 3 years, depending upon your performance, you can expect to be promoted to assistant manager. Again, 2-3 years manager. Then the journey gets slightly difficult, because then you're talking about being an associate director or a director or a partner. Then your marketing skills also come into play as to how you are able to get business. Like at senior level, it's not you're not only expected to deliver, you are expected to get business as well. Yeah, but I would say it's placed well in terms of at least the revenues for Big Four. Now it totally depends upon the individual performance after that. Yeah. So that's the first bucket. How are you growing within the Big Four stream? And there are all positives about it. There are no negatives. Outside Big Four, and I would say again, there are all positives about it. And it's the best field to be if you have to grow outside Big Four. The reason being, when you do transfer pricing, you don't do tax really. You understand businesses. And let's suppose you have done transfer pricing for 10 years, and let's suppose you have had 10 big clients. I won't count the small clients, right? You have 10 big clients. You would have understood their business in and out, because for you to arrive at the pricing, or you to discuss the company's facts and approach to their pricing with the tax authorities, one needs to understand the business. I've I've not seen people having calls with CEO in corporate tax field. It's more of a tax oriented field, and I've seen having calls with CEOs on a routine basis in transfer pricing, because a CFO cannot explain you the business in a manner which CEO can explain, right? So the opportunity for a transfer pricing consultant to speak to CEO is immense. And a CEO is a person who is running the business, who's really shaped of the business, who has bought the business as to where it stands. So he can really explain you how is the business shaped up, what are the key value drivers in the business, what is it that differentiates them to competitors. And after 10 years, you will really hear a transfer pricing consultant having such a diverse knowledge about so many businesses. Like my aspiration to grow in transfer pricing really emanated from this side. Like when I used to hear the partners in Big Four, I would hear them sharing knowledge about so many different businesses as to how this business operates, what are the nuances of some other business, and that used to be really amazing. Like I've heard partners going to client visits, looking at crash testing, as in automotive segment, how does crash testing happens, how does robotic line testing happens, and these are the experiences, right? So yeah, I would say outside Big Four, you have a really diverse knowledge, and there are good chances of you succeeding,
Okay.
right?
Wow. I think that was very helpful. And just one last question for you. Ayush, any tips for the professionals who want to make a career in TP?
Yeah, and that's something where everyone really gets confused. Yeah. So tips for people to really as you have to make big in transpricing. Yeah, I think first of all, everyone needs to assess their own interest, right? So as with you need to do a lot of reading in transpricing. As I said, the profile is really shaping up. There are a lot of uncertainties around technical positions. Even OECD is trying to come up with a lot of clarities. You can read about BEPS, base erosion profit shifting, right? It's shaping up, but it's not final, right? So there's a lot. So really a transfer pricing consultant needs to do a lot of reading. That's one, right? Obviously with time you will grow in terms of how you interact. As I said, you a transfer pricing consultant will be speaking to a lot of senior guys in the industry or in the businesses. So yeah, communication skills are important, I would say. But I would say it's a very difficult question to answer. It all depends upon your interest. If you really find reading interesting and you really find understanding the business interesting, then transfer pricing is a field to be. If I would say someone is a person who really is really a sections guy, right, and case law guy, like the chances he can do good, because again it's a part of tax field. There are rules, there are case laws for transfer pricing as well. But I would say understanding the business is the most important forte in transfer pricing. So it's really about you need to be good in reading, you need to be dedicated. Communication skills are important, as I said, and in any global mobility role, communication skills are absolutely necessary. And understanding the business is the key. I've seen a lot of people at senior level, and in fact, most of the people at senior level having good business understanding. So that's a key for me,
Okay.
right?
Wow, I think that was amazing. I think very, very insightful, Ayush. Thank you so much for taking out time today. And for the benefit of all, I'll be sharing the link to Ayush's LinkedIn profile so that you
Sure.
can reach out to him anytime if required. But thank you so much, Ayush. Thank you.
Yeah, and one word of caution before we close out.
Yeah.
So I have spoken a lot of positives about transparency, that you really understand the business, you really interact with the senior management. I've seen you getting into the price, doing the back end work, and partners rush with the clients, and eventually moving out because at the end of the day they didn't get what they were looking for. So I think patience is also a very important tip. You need to hang around, you need to be patient. I think with as someone grows in the level, definitely though all the things that I'm good things I'm speaking about, they will fall in the way. But yeah, it one it really needs to be patient. At junior level, all this may not happen, but definitely if you give 4 or 5 years to the field, all this will start happening,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Wow, that was very, very important. But thank you. Thanks a lot, Ayush. Thank you.